Hello, everybody. I'm Jesse Waters, along with Morgan Ortagus, Juan Williams, Dana Perino, and Brian Kilmeade. It's 5 o'clock in New York City, and this is The Five. Democrats cranking up the outrage machine and going after President Trump following the release of court memos on Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen. Party leaders now pushing impeachment and also the possibility of prison time for the president.
Certainly they'd be impeachable offenses because even though they were committed before the president became president, they were committed in the service of fraudulently obtaining the office.
There's a very real prospect that on the day Donald Trump leaves office, the Justice Department may indict him, that he may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
The walls are closing in on Donald Trump and his inner circle, including his family.
This criminal must be brought up by the Congress of the United States for impeachment.
When the evidence becomes so clear that you very likely have a criminal sitting in the Oval Office, what is the Congress left to do at that point?
Okay. President Trump fighting back, saying there's no smoking gun, no collusion, and that the payment detailed in the Cohen report was a simple private transaction. Juan, I'm going to use an analogy here. Let's say Hillary Clinton...
Didn't ask permission.
Because Gutfeld's not here. Let's say Hillary Clinton decided to get Botox in September 2016. She paid, $10,000, $20,000, whatever Botox costs. Decides she wants Botox.
It's not $20,000.
Whatever it costs. I don't know what it costs.
Not that I know. Not that
okay,
I know.
Whatever she pays, okay? And she doesn't report it to the FEC afterwards. And she's elected president, and then the Republicans find out, oh, Hillary got Botox, and she didn't report it on the FEC filing. And now she needs to be impeached. What would be the difference?
The difference?
Tell me what the difference would be, Mr. Williams.
You know, sometimes I think it's Christmas season. I've got to be nicer. But Jesse, that's
private
the most
transaction.
Jesse, is that a
private
ridiculous
transaction?
Private transaction
Between her and the Botox lady.
Are you? I mean, Jesse, we're talking here
Consensual
about campaign
Botox.
finance violation potential by individual one, according to his fixer, who said individual one told him to make this payment at a critical moment in the midst of a campaign.
Okay, the Botox would have been a critical moment.
Well,
before the debates, Williams,
remember,
right before she's on TV.
Oh, yeah. Remember, I think the better analogy, remember when she was sick and people asked her if she was sick and she didn't say, and then she was stumbling to the car? Maybe you could say, oh, we should tell people if you're sick.
It's not a financial transaction.
But similarly, I would say that when someone, in fact, hides relevant material from the voters, the argument is you're deceiving us. You're
okay, well, Juan, if you can impeach a politician for being deceitful, we'd never have a president.
That's a different question. You didn't say impeach. You asked an analogous question, but that's not impeach.
Well, they're
is a
trying to
separate
impeach
issue.
him based
no, they're
off
not
of this
trying
private
anything.
transaction.
This is Republican grievance politics. Oh, they're going to impeach him. No, they're not even in power yet, Jesse.
Well, they're talking a lot about impeachment because we watched that sound right there. So Dan Backer, a lawyer who does this for a living, says that this is brand protection. And brand protection is not a campaign finance violation, and it's perfectly legal.
Huh. Well, I guess they could try that and see how it works. I mean, campaign finance violations, I think that's the least interesting part of all of this, partly because there is the over-criminalization of campaign finance violations. But we do have campaign finance laws. It's just that they're not exactly clear-cut. And after John Edwards' situation, remember, he was acquitted, but only by a jury. Mm-hmm. That was actually went all the way. So the Justice Department had said, look, we have to fulfill our obligation and prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. But the brand protection one, I haven't heard that one.
That's a good one.
To use it.
You're welcome, if you're watching. So the other issue, too, because the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress, they have this big slush fund where they're paying out all these non-consensual sexual settlements over the last 10 years to the tune of, I think, several $1 million. And then this is a consensual transaction, and payments were made. What's the difference?
I think a couple of things are going on. Whether you are all for Donald Trump or against Donald Trump, by the way the indictment was written, according to legal experts, with the flowery language instead of the dry legalistic approach, it looks as though they're going after Trump. There's no doubt about it. So whether you think they should or shouldn't, let's just put that aside for a second. They are going after Trump to try to say that he directed Michael Cohen, because he already said it during Michael Cohen's sentencing, they directed Michael Cohen to make the payments. So Trump's got to think of not whether it's right or wrong or comparing to Hillary Clinton or not. It doesn't matter. matter. The Southern District of New York is trying to take him down. Now, the question is, what exactly did he deceive the American people on and get to his office falsely? Did anyone actually think that Donald Trump was the second coming of some high-level hope? No, they knew his background. They knew what was going on. And this is no different from if you're in a business world and your partner doesn't like you and you're going to run for office, that partner comes out and says, you know, that Brian Kilmeade, he robbed me of money. And whether you did or not, you just don't want that partner coming forward. I got to run for office. So you walk up to the guy and go, or the woman, you say, listen, what's it going to take to get this, put this away? I got to run for office. Boom, you get it done. So Michael Cohen directing, being directed or not being directed, that's what the Southern District of New York thinks is a problem. And if he doesn't take it serious, he's foolhardy. He's got to get on the offensive here, address it directly, get a legal strategy, and go after it. Opinion should not matter. Don't cheerlead or boo. You just got to get, this is the reality. This is the game.
It is interesting, Morgan, that now they're not trying to go after him for collusion or obstruction. Now it's just a campaign finance violation.
They're doing
come
both.
a long way.
They're doing both,
That's
though.
true. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the Botox analogy.
Yeah,
I think that's airtight.
Airtight.
Take it to the bank.
Insurance should be covering that.
You know, I don't think that this
Wait,
works.
insurance covers that?
Yeah.
I don't think impeachment over these sorts of issues worked for Clinton politically, like for the Republicans. It backfired on the Republicans. I think it would backfire on the Democrats. I mean, let's just think about this. If you start to have impeachment
and Litzinger, I think, and Mulvaney, I've heard, and Mnuchin's name, but I just think they need a political guy that has experience that can come in and defend the White House from the Democratic onslaught of subpoenas and also try to help Trump get reelected. John Kelly's not a political guy. He got along with Trump. Ultimately, it's about personal chemistry.
Yeah.
That is the most important.
You spend a lot
thing.
of time with the chief of staff when you're president, Morgan,
I know,
and they are moving from
Listen,
the legislative
they're thinking
phase
about
of the first 2 years of the presidency into the political one as they prepare for re-election, as well as all the other stuff going on.
Well, I have an idea for who should be his chief of staff, because I think it'd be great for us at the 5. Bring back the mooch.
Oh.
I mean, that would be great TV, man. No, I mean, I'm kidding. I love Anthony.
He would have been good.
He would have been good. You're right. I love Anthony. But so I think that you could sort of look at this as, can you get a political person from Congress like Meadows, or can you get a Trump loyalist, someone like Whitaker? I actually really like Chris Christie, because he's an interesting combination. His name has been out there about the political, because he's clearly been a governor, but also the legal, so he can help him get through both the politics and the legal. I think he needs an adult in the room, and I think John Kelly was a great chief of staff from what it looks like. I mean, he had an incredible career, and he commanded respect from what he did in the Army, and I think that's the kind of person that the president needs.
What do you think, Juan?
Well, I think that the reason that Nick Ayers was up there was because Jared and Ivanka liked Nick Ayers, and they did not like John Kelly. And apparently, at some point, the president wasn't even talking to Kelly for the last few weeks, but the president called on Kelly, I guess it was back in June of 2017, and said, hey, let's stop with all the fighting. Let's clear this place out, you know, let's make it work. And so he was the general come to make the troops stand at attention, but it didn't work. It just falls down.
I don't know. Who knows? I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs, but I do think it's kind of strange, Brian, that Nick Ayers had let his name basically be out there for a few months that he was possibly going to be the chief of staff, and then the president, I guess, offers it to him, and then he's like, oh, actually, I'm not going to do it?
They said both, everyone said great things about him. The president, a glowing tweet, as well as Mike Pence, a glowing tweet. It's got to be
and
something
he's still going to be a part of the team at America First.
It's got to be someone with the triplets. He's got triplets.
I know.
And after a while, you're not making a ton of money. You're never home. No one knows that better than you. And then you just said, listen, do you want to do this for 2 more years? I actually have to do it. It seems to me that if Mark Meadows is as positive as he seems to be on the possibility, it seems it's to be his to lose. They obviously get along. My worry for Mark Meadows and for the president is the president's going to be successful if he understands what moderates think and what Democrats think.
Right.
Mark Meadows knows what President Trump thinks because they think alike. They're both conservative. They agree with the whole Freedom Caucus. The one person I'd keep in mind that would make sense would be David Bossie, because Bossie knows how to get the president to understand what's going on. He also can take a blistering and keep on ticking.
And he wrote the book, Let Trump Be Trump.
And would you also say, Dana, that it's important to know what it's like having the incoming of investigations? He was on the offensive against Hillary Clinton, and now he'll understand what's going to be coming at him because he'll be there, and he knows how to say.
If you have Meadows or Bossie, forget about any discussions with Nancy Pelosi, with Chuck Schumer. These guys come in, and essentially they're going to reflect the hard right, the Freedom Caucus way of thinking. I don't think they have the capacity even to calm the waters in the White House. And believe me, that's a big issue right now. Remember, Trump went after Obama and said, oh, you can't even keep a chief of staff. In less than 2 years, he's had three.
Well, you're right.
And it's a 62% turnover rate in this White House.
Whoever becomes chief of staff, the media is going to come after so hard, and they're going to try to get him to get fired because they can say this White House has gone through more chiefs of staff than any other White House, so they have to expect that.
Christie makes sense, except if he gets on, they evidently broke the ice with Jared and Ivanka. Like it or not, that's the way it is. And evidently they broke through and had an understanding. I think it'd be perfect for it if he finds a way to do something he wasn't able to do before, and that is sustain himself with the president. Remember, he had the transition team. He had the transition team. They blew it up. And then he looked like he was going to be attorney general, and they kind of blew it up. And I'm just wondering, for him, on the surface, he'd be the perfect guy because he knows how to work with Democrats in New Jersey. He also knows how to fight, my goodness.
Well, he might not
and
be
he
able
knows
to
the
take
legal
his
thing.
Pay cut either.
You know, whoever gets the job,
the same thing as governor.
Whoever gets the job better get a lawyer.
All right, well, that's good advice, Juan. Everyone needs a lawyer.
It's a little depressing.
All right, up next, new government shutdown fears as President Trump gets ready to face off with two of his biggest border wall opponents tomorrow. We'll tell you about it.
Meeting at the White House tomorrow. The president set to face off with minority leaders Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. They're going to hash out border wall funding in order to try to prevent a possible government shutdown. Nancy Pelosi, though, adamant there will be no wall funding.
Most of us, speaking for myself, consider the wall immoral, ineffective, inexpensive. And the president said he promised it. He also promised Mexico would pay for it. So even if they did, it's immoral still, and they're not going to pay for it.
This funding fight comes amid new signs of desperation from the migrant caravan in Tijuana. New photos show an 8-month-old baby being passed through a hole underneath the wall and into the U.S. Brian, let me start with you. What do you say when people say, you know, the president has broken his promise on the wall, and now, at the last minute, he's trying to force the issue into a funding bill that would shut down portions of the government?
He should blame the Republicans a lot, too. They haven't made it a priority because it was his priority. He should be very angry at them. A couple of things. Why is it immoral to be able to control your border? And the fact is, they say, we'll give them $1.6 million, but it's for a fence, not a wall. Billion. Was for a fence, not a wall. That is flat-out politics. People can see through it. For someone who lives in San Francisco or the region, she doesn't tell me exactly where she lives. I'm wondering why. She said it's very brave of her to say we don't have to secure the border and it's immoral. She had that great line. Why don't they just mow the lawn so they can see through the grass? So this is pure politics. I think the caravan, as well as what's happening in Tijuana, the mayor coming forward, and the fact that the midterms are over shows that this isn't pure politics. This is a problem. The fact that Mattis is extending their stay shows that they are doing some good. And I think that this is an issue. I thought in one way, Juan, this could be a barter issue. That what do you need? You want infrastructure first up next time? Give me this now. We're in the lame duck session. We lead with infrastructure next. But Nancy Pelosi's concerned about blowing the speakership, which seems to be hers.
Well, you know, Dana, I'm listening to Brian. I'm thinking to myself, Democrats don't care about border security. They put a lot of money into border security.
Used to.
Well, they have. That's not. You know, it depends. They have, and they voted for it in the past.
Let's just think about this.
Now,
if you start to have
how you want to communicate, right? So they're setting their own narrative, and they're not leading with that foot. They're leading with the other foot. I think this meeting tomorrow is very interesting. I can imagine the strategy meetings that are happening today to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. It will be interesting to see how they come together or not for this first one. Chuck and Nancy and the nicknames and everything. I mean, can they figure out a way to work together? And maybe everything will look good in the meeting. And then remember what happened last time, though. This is the Democrats' complaint. They thought they had a deal. They go back to the Hill. They find out actually the deal fell apart between their ride from the White House to Capitol Hill.
You mean
so everybody goes in with a lot of distrust tomorrow, and it's up to the leaders. I mean, everybody gets a choice to make, and you can decide to work together tomorrow or not.
Well, let's go to Mr. Botox. I'm interested.
I don't think that nickname's going to work.
You don't think? Okay. Well, I'll call President Trump because he's so good at them. But let me ask you, your negotiating skills. The idea is the president would budge on Dreamers in exchange for a deal that would give him, I guess he's asking for $5 billion for the wall.
Well, I don't think they're going to take it. I mean, they had $25 billion for amnesty for 1.7 million dreamers, and then he said either the S-hole comment or they wanted to add on all of the lottery and merit-based stuff and chain, and then the deal fell apart. So I don't see it happening. The only chance he's going to have is in the last month. I mean, think about it. Until the Congress flips, this is his last at bat in order to squeeze billions for this wall. And if you think about it, he has a pretty high threshold for political pain. He can withstand a lot. So he could really take it to the brink and say, hey, guys, you're not going home for Christmas.
December 21st.
We're going right to the end
for
of this
Democrats
thing.
going into
and,
2020. But if that's what they want to do,
if they want to bring, I'm not going to get it until 2020. And you know, it will
Is
rattle
this
the
about
markets because the only thing consumer spending going into the Christmas season. But I think it's so desperate that he might have to pull that out. Right now, Chuck Schumer still a little bit has got some PTSD from the Schumer shutdown. Remember, he chose the illegals over the vets, so he's not looking to really make waves. And Nancy, I agree, she really needs to watch her left flank because she doesn't want to give too much right as she assumes the speakership. This is the resistance Congress.
Well, let me ask Morgan then.
Fox News alert, new fallout as President Trump and former FBI Director James Comey trade accusations after the former FBI director testifies behind closed doors to Congress and then goes in front of the media and goes after the president. This is Outnumbered, and I'm Melissa Francis. Here today is Harris Faulkner, Fox News contributor Jessica Charlov, host of Kennedy on the Fox Business Network, Kennedy, and joining us on the couch for the first time, Marine Corps veteran and Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher of the great state of Wisconsin. And you have the socks to join us here on the couch.
There we go. Bring the flag.
You know about the sock fashion. That's what we count on the guys for.
We have to give a shout out to both parents, one in Wisconsin and your dad in Fort Myers, Florida.
My dad, who is the biggest fan of this show in all of America and has been threatening me, at times trying to bribe me into going on this show.
Wow.
So this is his
So
Christmas
it only
present.
took money to get you here?
So Dr. John Gallagher, hi, how are you? Merry Christmas.
That was a very smart way for you to kick this off. Now let's get going. The president and the former FBI director tearing into each other after Comey's closed-door testimony Friday before the House Judiciary and Oversight Committee. Comey frustrated the GOP lawmakers repeatedly saying that he did not know or could not recall when asked questions central to the investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 campaign. Then last night at an event in New York City, Comey said this.
All of us should use every breath we have to make sure that the lying stops on January 20th, 2021. I understand the Democrats have important debates to have about who their candidate should be. They have to win.
Yeah.
They have to win.
All right, that was after President Trump had weighed in on Twitter yesterday morning, tweeting, "Leakin' James Comey must have set a record for who lied most to Congress in one day. His Friday testimony was so untruthful. The whole deal is a rigged fraud headed up by dishonest people who would do anything so that I could not become president. They are now exposed." A transcript from Comey's closed-door testimony was released over the weekend. It shows that Comey admitting that information used to secure a warrant to surveil members of the Trump campaign wasn't verified. And despite this, Comey told reporters later that allegations of mishandling investigation are, quote, nonsense. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham takes issue with Comey's assessment.
Well, my biggest reaction was he made a statement after he testified that the FISA warrant process, basically to look into that would be sort of a joke. I don't think it's a joke at all that a warrant was issued based on a document paid for by a political party, prepared by a foreign agent that's unverified to basically surveil a member of a presidential campaign. That's not funny to me. I want to know how that happened and the role he played.
I would add to that. So the president tweeted on 245 occasions former FBI Director James Comey told House investigators that he didn't know, didn't recall, couldn't remember, etc. The tweet went on. You look back at the person who served as special counsel to Comey, former federal prosecutor Bill Mateja, who said that Comey has a photographic memory.
Apparently not.
Well, or he's lying when he says he doesn't remember.
Well, I think I should caveat this by saying I'm not on the Committee of Jurisdiction, so I wasn't actually in that hearing. But Comey just comes off as a very self-aggrandizing and politically motivated actor. And I think he actually undermines his own case, and it makes it more difficult to figure out what happened and what didn't. And I think It's strange credulity to think that he had no awareness of any connection between the DNC and Fusion GPS, and also having reviewed all the classified material and the full report of the House Intelligence Committee. I came away being very concerned with the FISA process and what information was used as a pretext for a warrant. So I don't think dismissing it is helpful at all.
To that point, this is what was said about that process. You're talking about the unverified document that went into FISA. This was from Congressman Radcliffe. You, in your capacity as FBI director, referred to the Steele dossier as salacious and unverified. Comey says, yes. I don't know that I was referring to all of that. But again, your characterization was that it was unverified, even though you had verified it in court. What I understand by verified, Comey says, is that we will try to replicate the source information so that it becomes FBI investigation or conclusion rather than a reliable sources. That work wasn't completed by the time I left in May 2017, to my knowledge. Jessica, sounds like they used fake dossier to get a warrant, and he knew it.
I think he is attesting to the fact that that process wasn't completed, but it eventually was. I think this is normal grounds for questioning him, and I agree with your assessment. I think, as we've discussed many times on the couch, that James Comey has unified the left and the right, which is difficult to do these days. But I think what the president is trying to do by focusing on Jim Comey right now, instead of talking about what happened on Friday with the SDNY report on Michael Cohen and the Manafort report as well from Bob Mueller, is to avoid discussing very real issues for him, obviously having to do with the payoffs and the fact that his company is implicated in all of this. So it's much more convenient to go after Jim Comey than it is to deal with the very real threats that are facing his administration as a result of what he did in the campaign.
Kennedy?
So he didn't bother to ask these basic questions. What sort of a law enforcement director is he if he's not asking who paid for it, who were the parties involved, what was their motivation, what was the information they were going after, what is our relationship with this central person who is gathering the intelligence from Russian operatives who, by virtue of their involvement in the campaign, could be incredibly problematic. So if he doesn't know the answers to these basic questions, then he himself is incompetent. And if he does have a photographic memory and he knows the answers to these questions and he's stonewalling or lying about it, then he is guilty of what he's accusing the president of, and therefore he needs to extricate himself from the process immediately. It just goes to show that James Comey would have been fired by either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, and he is only out for himself. The fact that he is out there stumping for Democrats when he has been accused of being politically motivated against the president this entire time, it basically justifies the opposition against him.
But he's also accused of being politically motivated against Hillary, because he's the one that ruined her campaign with dumping that letter 11 days before.
I would say that Hillary Clinton would have fired him much faster.
I agree.
Because she was still wondering what happened in her loss and was looking in his direction, I'm certain, because of what happened on July 5th of the summer before the election. You know, well, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. No, I guess she didn't. So there was a lot of there with her and their relationship. I think he would have been gone. So I had questioned in the beginning why the current president didn't fire him right away, too. Because if the side that he was on couldn't trust him, who could trust him? That's one thing. So I know you're not on this particular committee, but you've questioned people before. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how it works. So you get a bite at the apple with James Comey, and then you get another one. Mm-hmm. So do you try to go down a road where he didn't remember? Like, was he sent home to do some homework? Say, well, could you work on your memory for these 161 or whatever times it was? I'm like, what's the goal for the next time?
Well, listen, I think, unfortunately, how it usually works is
because there's going to be a next time.
Well, usually there's a camera on, and so people take advantage of their 5 minutes not to actually ask questions, but rather to deliver.
What, lawmakers Brandeis?
I know, this is going to come as a shock to everybody. But I think you have some very effective questioners on that committee, Trey Gowdy in particular. It's sad to see that we're losing him in the next Congress, but the goal is just to get information, right? And as I've said from the beginning of all of this, it's hard to keep up, honestly, with just the turns every day, but sunlight's the best disinfectant. Let's get it all out there. Then we can also lock ourselves in a cabin at the end of it, read the reports, and come to a dispassionate assessment about this.
I don't want to be locked in a cabinet with any of these people. I just want them to ask really good. I'm sure it's a great.
How could he not anticipate? I mean, but to your point, how could James Comey not anticipate the questions that he was going to ask? And then that awkward giraffe immediately went out to the camera and said, all they did was ask me dumb questions about Hillary. Oh, this is so stupid. It's like, no, the American people want the answers to these basic questions that have remained a mystery and created giant gaps where people are filling it it with conspiracy
So there
theories.
comes in my question. When you get another bite at the apple, do you go back down the same road? Do you try to ask your questions differently? What do you do when somebody says, I don't remember?
See, I would ask the question based on this. So you put forward a document for a FISA warrant that you hadn't completed. You say you didn't know whether it was verified or not. You were still working on it. So then why did you include it in a FISA
Why
warrant?
not ask the FISA judge that question? Why not ask the FISA judge if this is an incomplete application, why on earth did you grant?
But he was a trusted source. So Christopher Steele had worked with the government before. This wasn't a random person that they were just taking his word
they had
for.
discredited
And it was
at that point. He
Absolutely
wasn't
they
used
had.
as a source any longer.
And
They
James
had
Comey wouldn't
stopped
even answer
using it.
basic
They wouldn't
questions
use
about
it.
the relationship with Christopher Steele because there's so much embarrassment that he was in the FBI's employ.
The whole chain of command, him not knowing that Perkins Coie was involved in all of that seems hard to believe because, we're voracious news consumers, but we shouldn't know more than the former FBI director about how all of this happened.
100%.
Well, and I think the fallout of all of this is that the American people will lose trust in an institution that we need to work, right? I have Marines that I deploy with that are now FBI agents. They need to have trust in their leadership, right? We need a functional FBI that has the trust of the American people, and I worry that that's what's getting lost in
Very
this
good.
process.
Good place to end, because that is all true. New questions over whom is the best person to replace outgoing White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. We'll tell you the names being discussed, and we'll debate what the White House needs as the president prepares for a re-election race and a possible report from the special counsel. Plus, the big bombshell among the legal filings that dropped last week, why the Democrats say the president should be worried.
The Michael Flynn filing was very significant. He met with the special counsel dozens and dozens of times and gave a great deal of information. I think the Flynn filing, if I were in the White House, would be the one that would make me nervous.
New fallout after the special counsel issued memos on Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen last week and on Michael Flynn earlier in the week. Now, for the first time, those filings are suggesting that President Trump may be connected to a federal crime, specifically a violation of campaign finance law. The incoming Democrat chair of House Intelligence even saying the president could one day be locked up over after he leaves office. Watch it.
There's a very real prospect that on the day Donald Trump leaves office, the Justice Department may indict him, that he may be the first president in quite some time to face the real prospect of jail time.
Republicans, however, like Senator Marco Rubio, are defending the president against what he calls a rush to judgment. And even independent Angus King, who caucuses with Democrats, says it's too soon to talk this way.
There's no reason to not stand by anybody in this moment. There are pleadings, there are cases, there are evidence. We're going to wait for all of it to be out there. And I would caution everyone to wait for all of it to be out there until you make judgment.
It continues to develop in ways that aren't favorable to the president. But I think, as you suggest, in the filings this week, there's nothing definitive, but there's nothing that exonerates the president either.
So the jumping of the shark, as they call it by Democrats.
Well, I think I agree with Angus King. I agree with Senator Rubio. And my Democratic colleague, Dan Kildee, I think, had a good message on the previous show. And he said, caution, listen, these are ongoing investigations. So everything we have now is pure speculation. I think it's also wise to be very skeptical about things we see being filtered through news stories, because in some cases there are selective leaks that are deliberately intended to put pressure on the White House. So let's calm down. And at a broader level, I know we just concluded an election and already we're in the midst of the 2020 presidential election. I don't want the vortex of 2020 to suck everything into its wake. There are 2 years where we can get some stuff done, and I urge and beg my Democratic colleagues not to go down this road.
So, Jessica, there is no shortage of people who blow through yield signs.
I've done it a few times myself. Maybe I will right now. I actually think that Jerry Nadler, who's really the one that this all kind of stops with, was quite reasonable what he was saying on the Sunday talk shows with Jake Tapper yesterday. He said, would these be offenses that could be impeachable? Yes. Are we necessarily going to be bringing impeachment proceedings? No. And I think it's important to highlight that. And when you say we should be cautious about how things are filtered through news stories and selective leaks, we actually got something special on Friday that we could read the reports for ourselves. The SDNY was very clear about what happened here, that the president ordered Michael Cohen to commit a crime. And a campaign finance violation is a violation. I know it's not your grand story of collusion yet, but in there was also evidence that Michael Cohen had talked to the Russians more than he said, that deal with the Russians would have been worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that $50 million penthouse for Vladimir Putin, and Manafort as well with more contact with the Russians.
So, Melissa, no doubt, from what some of the information that came down from Friday, this was, a lot for the White House to chew on. And so people were talking about, specifically Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, should he be pardoning some of the people who are speaking like a Paul Manafort? I want to hear again from Senator Rubio, and then let's talk about what he said. Senator Rubio was asked about this. Let's watch.
It would be a mistake, and I would strongly counsel against it. I don't think that, in my view, the presidential pardon power was not created for these sorts of purposes. I just think it would be the wrong thing to do, and I think it would be a huge political mistake as well.
I was trying not to move because you were looking at me, and I'm obviously not Marco Rubio, but you could hear his voice.
Yeah.
So we get the gist of it. He says that would be a huge mistake.
It would be a huge mistake.
Why?
I mean, because the crimes that were committed by Paul Manafort were actual crimes and had nothing to do with what is currently going on, and it just wouldn't make sense. I mean, yes, there is something to the fact that he had been investigated before and he wouldn't have been pursued this last time were it not for his connection to the president, but it doesn't change the fact that he broke the law in a big way. I would also say that when you go back to this idea of, his campaign, criminal is fraud, the campaign finance or whatever, I mean, we all know, and I know we're getting tired of hearing this, but, President Barack Obama also campaign finance violations, 1.8 million that were not reported.
It wasn't to fraudulently win the election. That's what Jerry Nadler was making the point of. That wasn't the same.
$5,000. So
that was
the same
repaid.
thing.
It wasn't weeks out from an election, and it's not like John Edwards either. I believe that those are false comparisons.
So how do you, not reporting that
John
people
Edwards had
gave
a
you money
baby.
doesn't help you win an election? I mean, obviously, if you're accepting money from people, it's to win an election.
But it was
So that's
repaid.
crazy.
They dealt with it right away in the proper way. That's why no hay was made of it. Weeks
a
out
lot
for of
an
hay
was made of
election.
it. They had to pay $375,000.
No. I mean, it wasn't
Before
argued
you
that
guys
false
go around
election.
the bend one more time with breaking news now. Reports of accused Russian spy Maria Butina appears to have reached a plea deal. A source familiar with the plea agreement says she will plead guilty to count 1, conspiracy to violate the foreign agent statute, second count dismissed for her. A cooperation as it relates to her activities to the United States on facilitating, quote, a better U.S.-Russian relations situation. She admits that she acted as a foreign agent without registering. And, of course, one of the first ways that America saw Butina was at that question and answer venue where the president was, and she raised her hand to ask a question. Congressman, what do you make of this?
Well, I'm just hearing it for the first time. But listen, I actually think people on both sides should want to get a full understanding of what the Russians were and weren't doing in our last election. Because I think...
What were they doing?
Well, I think they were clearly trying to cause exactly what we're seeing now, which is chaos politically, get us to attack each other, get us to be at war with each other, and prevent anything from getting done. But I think what's ironic about the current scenario, if their idea was to get an administration that was sympathetic to the Russians, they got indeed the exact opposite.
So what weren't they doing? Because you said it was were and weren't.
Yeah, well, we don't have a full understanding of the scope of money that they were spending in this election. From what we know about what was spent on Facebook, it was actually a very small amount right now. And I actually think we're going to see that this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of countries beyond Russia, like China, throwing money around the globe in an effort to undermine Western democracies, in an effort to get us to be at war with ourselves.
You think this is the tip of the iceberg, so
I do,
to speak?
indeed. And I think people are profiting from the complexity, in some cases, of our campaign finance laws and the lack of full transparency.
I would add to that, and I don't think it's just Russia. And I do think Russia is doing that. And I brought this point up on Steve Hilton last night. I think that there is some Russian involvement in what's going on in France, because I think discord benefits them, particularly when it comes to energy.
Yeah.
And I don't trust them.
So that was the breaking news. Thank you for responding to that. We'll move on. Battle lines already being drawn over President Trump's expected nominee for Attorney General. We'll debate where this could go. And the chief of staff position is open. Hang out the shingle after the president announced John Kelly will be leaving soon. So which qualities should the president look for in a new chief of staff? Congressman Gallagher, you have a lot of qualities.
Take myself out of the running.
Oh, he cut his own mic off. We'll be right back.
If he had a good hub and spoke system and he had one guy as his chief of staff that really liked him, and then he had fortification of confidence of those other people, the thing would actually run very seamlessly, just the way it did inside the Trump organization.